are so many different ways in which he tried to help the Hindu society as it was then, that we cannot really, in all honesty, even address all those different efforts, paths. But we'll have to pick and choose, and mostly we'll be talking today about the sati, the practice of burning widows along with their husbands. Raja Rammohan Ray was the one who worked tirelessly to stop that practice, and he finally succeeded barely a year and a half before he passed away to get the legislation enacted. He made a special trip to England and spoke in the parliament there, and in spite of some opposition, he was able to get it passed, the legislation prohibiting sati. And luckily for us, that legislation has been successfully enforced, and sati disappeared almost completely in the course of a few years since the legislation. And then besides the sati, his other efforts at making reforms in the Hindu society were like trying to stop image worship, because he was the founder of the Brahma Samaj in India, which did not believe in the worship of form. To him, God, or not God, reality, ultimate. Rita, can
oh no, everything's fine. It sounds good.
Okay.
It sounded, I think everyone can hear okay. Yeah.
Okay, so to him, he tried to revive the learning of the Vedanta, and as written by Shankaracharya, which believed in one God who was formless. So he tried to push the abolition of image worship in Hindu society, but he was not successful in that. We still do continue to worship images and in great pomp and splendor, so he failed there. And also he tried to stop the worship of many gods and goddesses. The two to him were issues that were not related. Because according to him, although Christianity does believe in one God, but Christianity was not able to completely abandon the worship of God as manifested in forms, like the images of Mary carrying child Jesus, or even the symbol of the crucifix. They are really forms. So in his eyes, the two issues were separate. The worship of God as one, and the worship of God in the form of images. He tried to do both, but he did not succeed in either one. The Hindus still do continue to believe in many gods and goddesses, in spite of, at the same time, supporting the idea of one God, because that's also a part of Hinduism, that God, even though he can be worshipped in many forms, in many different, focusing on different aspects of God. So one in many or many in one is rather the theory that modern Hindus still subscribe to, and they continue to do that. But in spite of that, we are all, whether we are believers in one God or God as formless, all Bengalis and Indians still are very proud of Raja Rammohan Ray, because we do understand where he was coming from, and also for the immense practical work that he did. Besides that, he also tried to promote women's education. His work was, other than the religious aspect, his social work mainly focused on the women's issues. And that stemmed, like I mentioned in my last lecture also, I'll just briefly mention to that, not because of any particular ideology or theory, but from his own life experiences. He came to that conclusion that society should treat both genders equally. And his particular interest in sati came from the fact that his own brother wife, his older brother's wife, of whom he was very fond because his mother was old and she was virtually in control of the household. It was a big joint family. And she was almost like a mother to him, or an elder sister to him. And when she was burnt along with his brother, after his brother's death, he was not in town at the time, and he tried to rush and stop it, but he wasn't able to. When he arrived, the whole thing was over. Go on. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that he touched several aspects of life, and today we will be talking mostly about the sati. And even when we come to the issue of the sati and how Rammohan Ray helped to resolve that issue, we have to understand that there were several stages in the issue of how to uplift the status of women in the Hindu society. So Rammohan Ray, he just began, he started the process, and from then on, like in a wave, we have continued, and one by one, the issues have been addressed to. After Rammohan Ray, like I said, is mostly remembered for sati. The caste system, Rammohan Ray's attitude was kind of ambivalent. He thought that it did serve some purposes, and he was not able to divert too much of his attention to that issue, but he himself did not believe in it. Okay, he treated all castes alike. Then after Rammohan Ray, Vidyasagar was another, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar was another stalwart in the issue of women. He is the one who passed the legislation of widow remarriage and abolition of child marriage. And he was successful. He did pass the legislation allowing the remarriage of widows. But I would say that the law is there, but it did not really touch the psyche of the Indians, both male and female. So very few of the widows actually do remarry after widowhood. And this has become even more so because these days women do marry at a later age, and so maybe there's a few years of difference in age between them and their husbands, so the husbands live longer, so the state of widowhood also does not, there is no onset of widowhood until the woman has maybe reached a middle age or late middle age or old age, so they don't feel maybe that urgent need to remarry again. So child marriage also Vidyasagar fought against. That led to age of consent or marriage to first to 15, then 17, then 18. I think currently it is 18. But in the rural areas, child marriage is still prevalent. I mentioned probably in my last lecture that when my father's mother was married, she was only 5 years old. Then her husband was 11, but and they lived to a ripe old age, had 6 children, and were as happily married as an average marriage is. And then my father's oldest sister, my aunt, she was married when she was 9, and her husband was 16. And but then she lost her husband within a few months of her marriage. So she was basically a child widow, somebody that Vidyasagar child wanted to say. And the times were such at that time that all young men were always looking for widows because they wanted to do something good for the society. So my father he was looking for widows. Of course, when he married my mom was not a widow, but I'm just mentioning this as an example of how the men of that age felt. Then after Vidyasagar, I'd like to refer to Swami Vivekananda. His way of trying to improve the status of women was mainly through women's education. He was focused on that. And then I would also like to mention some literary figures like Tagore. Tagore was devoted to, starting a social order in which women were treated equally with men. But he was the first one who introduced the idea of a really mature, grown-up woman beyond the stage of protection. First, there's you try to create a protected stage where the woman receives the education, gets all the facilities. You're constantly working for their improvement. But what is an improved, advanced, modern woman going to look like? It's not just having the rights, but also being allowed to, and herself also voluntarily performing the same duties as men. So rights along with liabilities and obligations and commitments that you want to perform towards society. In his famous drama, you could perform it in dance form. It's called Chitrangada. So there, Arjun, who was attracted to Chitrangada first by looking at her physical form and beauty, physical beauty, but actually no, I'm saying it wrong. Chitrangada, the woman, was the princess, and she was attracted to Arjun, who was the famous hero, the warrior hero of the Mahabharata, the prince. But Arjun was not attracted to her because her father had raised her as a son, almost as a son, as a prince, because he did not have a son. And so she did not pay much attention to her looks as women usually do, or were supposed to do. It's very difficult to say, to maintain the political correctness. Anyway, so, but she was devastated when Arjun rejected her. She proposed to Arjun, Arjun rejected her. And then she was determined to win his approval. So she prayed to the god of love, who gave her beauty of the feminine form for a certain period of time, and she was able to win over Arjun's attention at that time. But did she like that? Did she really enjoy that favor of Arjun's in her heart? She did not, because she wanted to be appreciated by Arjun on the basis of her merit as a human being, on what she could do as good as any man could do. If she could go to war, she could take care of her state business, she could take care of her subjects, all of that. And so finally Arjun came to realize that, and before accepting Arjun, her life, Chitrangada made sure that Arjun understood her fully, and she told him that I will be your consort, your wife, but only if you allow me to do the same things that you would do for me, and I would like to go through the same ordeals, the same responsibilities and duties that you think you have towards me. So Arjun was much impressed, and they were united. Okay, so that was Tagore's contribution to the women's field, that it's not just the rights, but the woman must also be conscious of her duties to society in order to be considered a fully grown first-class citizen. And besides Tagore, Gandhi also was of the same kind of attitude. Although Gandhi had a child marriage, he was 13, his wife was, I think, slightly older than him or almost the same age, and they fought quite a bit, not just verbally but physically too. So Gandhi was hit by his wife several times, as he says in his autobiography. But he insisted on his wife performing the same duties in the independence movement as he did, and not just independence movement, but in social movements of his. Like he insisted that she clean the public lavatories, sweep the train compartments, and do everything that he was willing to do, that she must also be willing to do. At first she did not agree to it, because she had her own traditional beliefs about her status in society and what she can do and what she will not do, which is beneath her dignity. But slowly and slowly she was trained, and she willingly did whatever she could see that her husband was willing to do, so she was willing to do that as well. And basically the dignity of all labor. Then I would also like to refer to a couple more people, like a writer approximately at the same time, Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay. He addressed other areas of women's issues, like the tendency amongst Hindus to select, when they arrange marriage, to select the fairer women of fairer complexion. In general, what he addressed was the sorrows of a woman who is not so comely, not so beautiful, not so pretty, does not have the fair complexion, maybe, just a plain woman, and what their sufferings were, that nobody was willing to marry them because marriage was mostly arranged at that time by parents, and they were kind of left aside or married off to not very enviable people. So that was a contribution of him, and also the sorrows of a barren woman, the sorrows of a woman who has been married but has had no children, and what kind of treatment they received in their life. That was also all this in short stories and novels he wrote. That those are like timeless problems, I would say. They exist even today. Soon after that, we had independence from the British rule, and the Constitution, the Indian Constitution came into being, and that gave the women some rights, like in 1955 and 56. During that time, several laws were passed regarding women's rights to, actually I'll refer first to the polygamy situation. When men used to marry several times, women could marry only once until Bidashagar passed that law. And the Constitution did away with the polygamy. As long as your wife was alive, you could not remarry. That was a great step, because until then, women had to suffer the torture of having another co-wife living in the same house, having children with her husband. So that was something that the Constitution did for the new government did for the women. After polygamy in 1955, another act was also passed. It was called the Hindu Marriage Act, which allowed women to divorce under many conditions, but still she was allowed a divorce. And men were also treated both genders the same way. The rules were the same for both genders. And the other important part of it was the Hindu Succession Act, which described how property was going to pass from husband to wife or from father to children. Now this was, I think it's very important in a topic that deals with sati or Rammohan Ray, because the sati, or the burning of the widows, was mainly a property-related affair. There were joint families mostly in existence in those times, so when one of the sons in the family died, the other brothers and the father-in-law, they wanted the property left behind by their son to stay in their family, not pass on to the widow, whom they still continued to consider as somebody from another family, basically, not within the family. Although by law and by religion they were part of the family, but the main motivation was how to grab that property of the widow. So the best way was to dispose of her, and by the time her father's side of the family could come to take her away from the house, most of the time if they're successful in arriving on time, they would take the girl back with them to their own family, and most widows continue to live with their fathers or their brothers until they die a natural death. But if they were not able to be there on time, there was virtually no big transport system in existence at the time, then they would kill, and if they had grown-up sons, sometimes they would resist and because they would already get their father's property and they would keep their mothers with them. But if the woman was unfortunate enough not to have any children or was a child, not grown up enough to have children of their own, or if they had daughters only, then no sons to protect them, then they would have to die. So the Hindu Succession Act in 1955 effectively put a stop to the practice of depriving women of a share in their husband's property. But still it was a very limited share. When the man died, his property, the law is still like that, is divided equally between the mother, the wife, the sons, and the daughters, and any unmarried sister. So there are several claimants. But still something comes into her hand. And the passing of the father's property equally between girls and boys, that was also enacted in the Hindu Succession Act in 1955. That was the major change that happened, that the father's property would be equally inherited by all children, not by just the sons. And another important aspect was that if a woman had any property through inheritance or through any earnings of hers, whatever earning that may be, she has the absolute claim to her property, her husband does not. That's also still in force. It used to be called stridhan, the woman's absolute property. If she gets it from her father or mother or her own earnings, men cannot touch it. So, I'm sorry, something there. And since Nehru, our first Prime Minister, was the driving inspirational force behind the changes to the Hindu Marriage Act. Since then, we have had one more significant change in Indian constitution, or I don't know if it's a part of the constitution yet, but it is very recent, happened I think early this year. That was proposed and it passed, I think from bill to law by our current Prime Minister Modi, that was among the Muslim society, that the triple talaq, when the husband could divorce the wife by saying divorce, talaq, talaq, talaq 3 times, and that's all. And then people finally began to do the triple talaq over phone, text messaging, talaq, 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 and the marriage is over. So it was becoming really bad. So that has been ended. Amongst a huge outcry from Muslims that why before the government tended to keep impartial attitude, the Muslims and the Christians, they were allowed to put their own laws of marriage and divorce and succession. And the Hindus, whatever the Hindus had to do was also something that the Buddhists applied to Buddhists, Jains, and Sikhs. These 4 really faiths took the same laws. But that's where we have with the triple talaq end is where the last of the legislative ways of putting an end to injustice. Now I would like to descend quickly to Sati. And the Sati, the people who upheld the Sati, they had a whole philosophical set of ideas behind that. And that's something that Rammohan had to fight against, because society was very conservative even at that time. We are talking about the late 1700s and early 1800s. I believe it was 1830 or 31 when the Sati Abolition Act was passed. 1829, okay. And I think Rammohan died in 1831 or 31. And he died in Bristol, right? He died in England, he couldn't come back. So the main argument was that of the people who were sponsors, who said yes to Sati, wanted to keep Sati, was that it is nothing but a form of suicide. So a person has a right to commit suicide. That's why I think that the issue of sati, although it is done with, is not really completely dead. As we go along the arguments, we'll see that the same arguments are used by us, or they still rage in society, whether a person has the right to kill oneself. Okay, so the argument of the Pandits was that she is committing suicide. She is not willing to live anymore after the death of her husband, so she should be allowed to do that. We should respect her wishes. And to which Rammohan Ray replied that no, it is not, sati is not a suicide, because the suicide has a minimal will involved in it, but he thought that the sati was made to burn herself by force. So it is not, excuse me, not suicide. Taking advantage of the woman's lack of education, the people are somehow inciting her to do it. So what are the real motives? Why are you inspiring or inciting this woman to commit a suicide? So they said that the opponents replied that, well, there are several reasons. First of all, if this woman kills herself on the funeral pyre of her husband, she's going to go directly to heaven and enjoy eternal happiness with her husband. What is she going to do now? She cannot remarry. Her children will be grown up one day and leave her in any case. So she's going to live a very fruitless life. So why not go to heaven with her husband and enjoy eternal bliss there? And they even gave an analogy of a snake catcher and a snake. That such a woman can be so powerful by virtue of her good deed that just as a snake catcher goes underneath, digs in the holes and goes in the jungle and catches the snake by force. Similarly, such a virtuous woman can get her husband, rescue her husband of all his miseries and sins and save him too, not just herself, but save him from all the misdeeds that he has done in his life and take him with her to heaven. Then the other argument was that this is the only way she can free herself of the curse of having to be born as a woman. If she can go to heaven like this, in her next life, she will be reborn no more as a woman, but maybe as a man or in some other form. And if a woman's husband should die in another country, then she should get his shoes and hold on to the shoes and perform the sati with that. So, the reasons are more or less like this, that this is a good deed for her because it will take her to heaven, release her from her misdeeds, release her husband from his misdeeds, release her husband's family from his misdeeds. So she was like the deliverer of all sins. And then, of course, the reference to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata where Madri she killed herself on her husband's funeral pyre, and then, of course, the story of Sita, where she had to go through the Agni Pariksha, pass the test of fire, come out of fire unscathed after having lived in Ceylon with Sri Lanka with the person, Raja Ravan, who stole her and kidnapped her to prove her own innocence. So the idea that fire is an all-purifier, fire is the final test through which you have to pass in order to prove yourself, was a typically Indian concept that had lingered in society for a long time. And to that now, Rai responds that all of these things that you are talking about, that she can rid her husband of all those things, and that she can free herself from the curse of being born as a woman, why do you say all these things? She can, even without dying, this is where you need to pay close attention, that in those times the alternative to death to Rammohan was still the pursuit of strict celibacy and a life of detachment for a widow. If she's not going to die, then what can she do? That's what the other party was asking. What is her life going to be like? What function is she going to perform in society? That she can still continue to live her life as an ordinary woman was not at all acceptable, even to Raja Rammohan Ray. Okay? His prescription was that, in accordance with the scriptures, in accordance with the strictest of the Hindu philosophical texts, she can still live the life of a celibate woman. Practice brahmacharya. Okay? You wear a white piece of sari, crop your hair, eat vegetarian food, and not be ever attracted to another man, not look at another man, and just be a figure of celibacy. So, and to justify what he's saying, he cites from the Sanskrit shlokas that Dimriti Bhartari, a woman whose husband has died, has to practice brahmacharya or commit sati. That is the step. And Ray's defense is that since brahmacharya is mentioned as the first alternative and sati is mentioned second in the sloka, therefore what the scriptures recommend is that the first choice of the woman is to practice brahmacharya. That is the first choice that you must throw open to the woman first. And if she cannot do it, if she thinks that a life of brahmacharya is too hard to follow, then she has the option of committing sati. And then Ray said that this is not an ichha vikalpa. Ichha vikalpa means I can do either this or that. I can practice either sati or I can live the life of brahmacharya. But that is not the case. According to his logic and philosophy, it is not that case. It is first first brahmacharya, then if the woman chooses not to do that, she has the path of sati open to. I think he said that with a lot of reluctance, but that was the logic that he tried to enforce, the either or. Like in the banks, when we open a term deposit, you have to think about who are the beneficiaries going to be. Is it going to be only in your name or you and someone else, either or and, like writing a check, either this or his or her, that kind of logic. Anyway, and then his further argument was that karma is of three kinds. There is sakam karma. Sakama means when you do something which you do in order to gain something. And the nishkam karma, which is something you do without wishing for the fruits, looking for the fruits of action. Now, if the sati is going to, and within nishkam sakama karma, there are two different types. That's why I said three, because one is when you do something to gain some obvious ends in this life, and the other is when you do something for the fruits of action, if not in this life, then in next life. That I do something holy so that I can increase my credits for punya, for doing good jobs and good things, virtuous actions, so that in my next life I reap the fruits, I go to heaven. Or there is the completely nishkam karma, which he describes as nivritta karma. That means you are not pushed into this kind of action for reaping any fruits, whether in this life or in the next life. So that is the total nishkam karma. And when the sati is being incited to get into the climb of the funeral pyre in order to achieve something good, to take her husband to heaven, then that is not a complete nishkam karma. So it is, after all, a sakama karma of a different variety. And then he introduces a very interesting notion of the punya kshaya. He says, good deeds, just like bad deeds, come to an end. The credits that you derive, acquire, due to performing something good, they don't last forever. You have to continue to be a virtuous person. It's not like that I did something good and then that's going to last me this life and my next life to keep me happy and contented. That doesn't happen. Just like pop, when we do something that is sinful and the scripture provides definite steps, ways and means by pursuing which you can rid yourself, you can shine, you can erode the effects of your bad deeds. These are prescribed. Similarly, our good deeds also erode after some time. So very soon the sati is going to, exhaust all the merits of her good deeds, and then she will be born again. That's what happens when we use karma with calm, in order to gain something to achieve virtue. Rewards of virtue are also short-lived. And then the opponents say, well, but that may be so, but it is tradition. It is tradition that the satis do that, which is easy for Rai to refute, is that tradition is no justification for continuing to commit something that is abhorrent. And that would justify, cults like the Thagis, where generation after generation, dynasty after dynasty, we continue to do something wrong. So that's not a real answer. Then the other argument that the opponents brought about is that vyabhicharabha. That means if you do not look after a woman, take control of the woman, then she is going to go stray. To which Rammohan responds is that that's only a possibility. She may or she may not. And even if she does, it's the other gender engages in such acts at least 10 times more than the female gender does. So, if it is dictated by nature, that's how it is meant to be. You cannot enforce discipline like that. It has always to be an internal thing and can be controlled and checked only by listening to good counsel and by giving proper education. Then the woman can choose on her own what is right for her to do or not for her to do. Then I would like to refer to one article that the opponents of Rammohan Ray say that, can we not make it less painful? Like we hear in death penalty arguments that go on even today, that how can we make the lethal injection less cruel, less painful? Can we not do it, make it less painful? And they suggested that maybe if we light the funeral pyre at the far end and then bring the woman and sit her on the pyre, so she's not getting the direct heat right away, her skin is not burning, but by the time the funeral pyre really begins to catch on, then she will become like senseless within a few minutes out of fright and pain, trauma. And then whether she burns or not, she's not going to feel it. So she can die a painless death. So Rammohan Ray said at that time, this is Bhakya Kosha. It's just a play of words. And you guys, you have become like hard-hearted criminals because you repeat killing of such women and witnessing the killing, you have become immune to the suffering that you cause to other people. And now we see that, yes, but these arguments is not just a play of words. It is an attitude that people have even today. So the issue is not completely dead. Just as assisted suicide and standing by to see people getting killed, or even hiring for war for military. When is killing someone, killing yourself or killing of another person, when is it justified? We do it all the time. We try to, we do have cases now that when we scratch our heads and think whether it is assisted suicide is a good thing or is an allowable thing, under what conditions, to what extent. And we get, the terrorists kill themselves for their own political and religious beliefs. And the government legalizes the military, which kills other people for the sake of another set of political beliefs. So it's not like a dead argument. The issues are still there as to when and exactly under what conditions is either killing yourself or killing another person, or just watching another person die, or pulling the plug off when someone is in a coma. Under what circumstances are those justifiable? So there is no end to this. Then of course there are some other minor arguments like women are short-witted, they are by nature restless, they like to engage in pleasure, they are not trustworthy. I don't think those were very, those arguments are no longer carry no weight anymore. And Rammohan Ray at that time said, who has tested women's wits? So there was no IQ test has been done, and these are so self-evidently false that he did not even consider it worth his while to address them to a deep extent. And as to that they are not capable of remarriage, that was fixed by Vedanta later. And the last point that I would like to mention is that all these reformers, the Rammohan Ray, Vidyasagar, to a certain extent Tagore and Gandhi, is that they constantly appealed to authority to prove their points. They felt this need within themselves to cite scriptures, to cite previous practices, to justify what they were trying to do. And they did so painstakingly. Their arguments were, to a certain extent, meticulous, their efforts, that they would sit down with piles of books and bring out where they can find in the ancient scriptures arguments against sati, or where they can find in the scriptures arguments for widow remarriage, so that they could finally, they thought, silence the opposite party. And thinking about that, I would like to refer to an idea expressed and vigorously supported by one professor, current days. His name was Partha Chatterjee. He teaches in Columbia and also in Delhi. And according to him, this need to refer to the past to justify their viewpoints came from the political setting of that time, the nationalism that was there at the time, the movements to free India from colonial rule and to build a new modern India. And during that movement, the nationalists were actually like sieving, going through a selective process in which they would select something that they could learn from the West, from the European education to which they were exposed at that time by the British, and the traditional Indian beliefs and philosophy that had sustained India for that time, that long time. And in order to make that selection possible, what the Indians in those times believed was that the West had been very successful in developing the material side of our culture, in industrialization, in scientific explorations, innovations. So that's something that India should accept from the West. But so far as the spiritual side of the Indians was concerned, they have enough of their own and they do not need to borrow or copy European civilization for that. So if the Indian woman's issue was kind of, if you study Indian feminism, you will see that most of the reforms for the cause of the women were done by men. There are hardly any names of women establishing their case. Most of it was the men who had done it. So why so? Because the Partha Chatterjee argues that because the Indian movements at that time were all engulfed by the nationalism debate. And the nationalists saw to it that we accepted European civilization very selectively, and so far as the modernization of women goes, the ideal Indian modern woman does not have to be a replica of the ideal European modern liberated woman. So we'll take some, we'll reject some, we'll keep some of our past and reject some of our past. And the modern Indian woman, therefore, they modeled after someone who is educated, who is willing to and capable of going out to work if there is need, but whose mentality is not fashioned after the same kind of someone from another culture. Maybe she fits her culture, her traditions, but we have our traditions and we want to keep that. And so they thought of the feminine as very important for an ideal Indian modern woman. That she has to retain her role that she had occupied all this time. It was not all a history of weakness in Indian feminine development. So there were strong points about the Indian women, and those strong points will have to be retained even though she discharges the duties as called for by society at the time and gets educated and trained for that purpose. Little things like food, dress, conversation, all of these things are important, but that does not mean that she has to shed what she was before. So that was, I think there is some substance to it, to this kind of thinking, but at the same time, I think that Partha Chatterjee was a little bit soft on that, because there were some practices in society involving women which were definitely something that we should be completely eradicated, not at all spiritualistic, and sati was one of them, polygamy was one of them, how property was going to pass from generation to generation or between husband and wife was one of them. So those were issues in which the help of the British ruler was needed. Just because they had colonized us did not mean that we will not take any help from them and we will just do whatever we can to improve ourselves, because had Rammohan Ray not abolished sati, many more women would have died by this time. And had the act abolishing polygamy not been passed by the Indian government, many more widows would have suffered. Likewise, widow remarriage and child marriage. So certain practices which were there in Hindu society, which were typically, specifically, innately wicked and cruel, they were done away with for good by the British, and for that we are indebted to them. There is nothing to be ashamed of, because after all, nationalism tries to, exclude other people. It is not a means or a force of unification, it is a force of division, that we are better, we are spiritually superior, you are materially superior. That is, I don't think that is the truth. If we look at the world, every country has some spiritual traits, some material traits. Does not mean that just because Europe is an industrially advanced nation, has made riches, that therefore they are spiritually inferior. Cannot be so. Because if we look at like maybe 50 or 80 years ago, the same traits of the soft feminine which the Indian nationalists were encouraging or trying to retain. All of that was here in the West too, in the Americas too. The softness of the feminine was appreciated, was encouraged. Women's education was not there, it came on slowly, but that did not mean that the women will have to be exactly like men. These are issues which I think more related with time than so with space. With time people learn anything, and now that there is absolute globalization, that typical Indian feminine that the nationalists had been dreaming of, that is also undergoing change. That is social evolution. Okay, I think I have touched almost everything, and one can of course go on debating these things forever, but in the end I just want to say that Raja Rammohan Ray had definitely done a great service to women, just saved their lives, and at the same time also initiated the whole chain of social reforms that one by one the leaders took up and enacted. Okay, thank you.